Welcome back. I'm going to be solving the questions that I left for you guys to try out from the previous video and this video. So let's start with the first one. We have 2 cosine x minus 3 is equal to 0. So again, we just want to isolate cosine first. To isolate it, we want to try to get rid of anything that's next to it. So we're going to want to add the square root of 3 to both sides to get it by itself. So we're going to have 2 cosine x is equal to the square root of 3. You can either choose to write cosine with the parentheses of x or without the parentheses. It's the same thing because as long as it's next to it, you know that it's a part of cosine. So now we can divide 2 to both sides, as we're left with cosine of x is equal to the square root of 3 over 2. And now we have solved for our cosine. Our second step is to try to find one solution using the inverse function. So we know that our x is equal to the cosine inverse of the square root of 3 over 2. Now let's just plug it into our calculator and see what we get. Again, remember that your calculator has to be in degree mode for you to get a nice answer. So you can go to cosine, second cosine, and then click the square root of 3 over 2. So you should have gotten 30. So this is equivalent to 30 degrees, which is the same as pi over 6. So now we have found one solution. So one solution is pi over 6. Now let's just plug it into our general form. So x is equal to plus or minus pi over 6, because that was our cosine inverse, plus 2n pi, where n is equal to 0, plus minus 1, plus minus 2, so on and so forth. So this is our final solution for that. Did you guys get this? Okay, and for the next one, we have tangent squared minus 3 equal to 0. So again, we have to try to isolate tangent by itself. So we have to add 3 to both sides. So now we have tangent squared x is equal to positive 3. Since we have this square, we want to try to get rid of it. In order to get rid of something that's being squared, we can take the square root. So if we take the square root of both sides, the square root cancels out the square. So what we're left with is tangent x is equal to the square root. Whenever you take the square root, you have to be careful because you always have a positive and negative. So it's positive and negative square root of 3. This is where some of you guys might have forgotten that minus sign. So this here gives us 2 cases now. So we're going to have that tangent of x is equal to the square root of positive 3, and that tangent of x is equal to negative square root of 3. From here, now our x is going to be tangent inverse of the square root of 3. Also, one more thing. Sometimes people call the inverse of tangent arctangent. So that's one thing that you guys can say too. So if we plug this into our calculator, let's see what the tangent inverse gives us for the square root of 3. Second tangent, and then we can plug in the square root of 3, and that gives us 60. So we have 60 degrees. 60 degrees is the same as pi over 3. So we have that for our solution. And on this side, we have that x is equal to tangent inverse of the square root of 3, negative 3. We can just plug this in again. So second tangent, negative square root of 3. And that gives us negative 60. So this is going to be equal to negative 60, which is the same thing as negative pi over 3. So now that we have this, we have both positive and negative solutions. So our final answer can be x equal to both positive and negative pi over 3 plus n pi. And again, where n is equal to 0 plus minus 1, so on and so forth. And here, for this final question that I left you guys, you can notice that 4 and 1 is a perfect square. This means that this is a perfect square trinomial. Since it's quadratic, you're going to want to try to factor this. So if you factor this and you want to set it equal to 0, you have to think of 2 numbers that multiply to give you 4. 2 numbers that do that are 2 and 2. And then remember, we have to add that cosine in there. So we have cosine x. And now two numbers that multiply to give us 1 are 1 and 1. What we have to deal with now is double check that the inner two and the outer two add up to give us this negative 4. So 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 times 1 is another 2. So we want both of these to be negative so that they give us negative 4. And in order to do that, both of these signs have to be negative. So this is what it factors into. And now we can officially solve for it. We want to set them both equal to 0. So we can set 2 cosine x minus 1 equal to 0, and then 2 cosine x minus 1 equal to 0. And since these are both the same, I'm going to work on only one side. So here we can add 1 to both sides, and we're left with 2 cosine x equal to 1. So now we can just divide 2 to both sides again. So our cosine x is equal to 1/2. If you guys plug this into your calculator, you should get that x is equal to 60 degrees, or pi over 3. And we can double check that. You guys can do second cosine to get that cosine inverse of 0.5, and that gives you 60 degrees. So your final solution would be x is equal to plus or minus pi over 3 plus 2n pi. And that's it. So I hope your answers checked out. You guys can let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest videos. Bye guys.